The Buffalo Bills made a couple of sneaky good additions to the practice squad. How can they help? That plus my 5 predictions for Sunday against the Bucs are all coming your way today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Locked On Bills is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Well, folks, welcome in. It's the last conversation that we're going to have before the Bills host the Bucs in Week 11. And so we'll give you my 5 predictions for Sunday. We'll talk to Dr. Kyle Trimble of Banged Up Bills about the injuries. But in this opening segment, I want to break down a couple of practice squad additions from this week, plus share some final thoughts about this matchup and some very clear and obvious ways that the Bills need to attack the Bucs on Sunday. But let's start with these practice squad additions. A couple of really nice practice squad additions, all things considered. We're talking about, entering Week 11. And, it's nice to get a couple of additions like this. Let's talk about it. The first one, wide receiver Mecole Hardman, 27 years old. He's 5'10", 187 pounds, ran a 4.33 40-yard dash, was a 2019 second-round pick by the Kansas City Chiefs out of Georgia, and has basically spent his entire career with the Chiefs. Was there 2019 through 2022. Then he left to sign with the Jets, and it wasn't long into that season before Kansas City actually traded with the Jets to get him back, and then he spent 23, the rest of that season with Kansas City, 24 with Kansas City, and then this past year he was with the Packers during the offseason, but he didn't make that team, and now he finds himself on the Bills practice squad. Of course, as a second-round pick, he did get some opportunities to help that Chiefs offense. Had over 500 receiving yards in 2019, 2020, and 2021. But where he's really made his biggest contributions has been in the return game, which is where I expect him to have most of his opportunities with the Bills. Right now, the Bills have just not been able to get much going in the return game in terms of those explosive returns. Right now, the Bills are 18th in kick return average. They're 31st in punt return average. Now, Hardman is experienced at doing this, especially in the punt return capacity. So far in his career, 96 punt returns, an average of 9.4 yards per return, and a touchdown. He also has 46 fair catches. So very experienced doing this. In fact, he's the most experienced returner that the Bills have now that he's part of this mix. And you also think about Brandon Codrington, who is the Bills return specialist. That is a healthy scratch every week. You just can't do that. You can't have a return specialist that the team doesn't even use on a weekly basis. That's tough to justify a roster spot for that player. And so I do wonder, what the fate of Brandon Codrington is through this whole thing. But to me, it's very clear that Hardman is your opportunity to elevate what you're getting right now in the return game, especially with punts where Khalil Shakir is handling those duties. So my enthusiasm or expectations, I don't really have much of it for Hardman offensively. The Bills can't even get Curtis Samuel or Elijah Moore going in a meaningful way offensively. I don't think a midseason edition of Mecole Hardman is going to all of a sudden be a guy that's going to spark this offense, but I think he can help this return situation. The other practice squad addition that the Bills made this week is Morgan Fox, 31 years old. He's a defensive lineman, versatile defensive lineman, kind of an inside-outside player, listed at 6'3", 275 pounds, was an undrafted free agent in 2016 out of Colorado State Pueblo, and was originally with the Rams. He was with the Rams 2016 through 2020. And with the Rams, he was actually the Michael Hoyt role before Michael Hoyt filled the Michael Hoyt role for them. He went to the Panthers in 2021, signed a 2-year, $8.1 million deal. Then he went to the Chargers for a couple of seasons, signed a 2-year, $7.25 million deal. And then this past offseason, he signed with the Falcons, signed a 2-year, $5.5 million deal. He ultimately did not make that roster and now finds himself on the Bills practice squad. So, look, I'm not trying to sell you on the moon and stars here, but what Morgan Fox is a reasonably sound rotational defensive lineman in the NFL. And the Bills can use that, right? Based on the status of this defensive line with the injuries that they have to Hoyt and Oliver, but also just a lot of young players. You lost Landon Jackson. You've lost Dwayne Carter. You could use somebody that simply profiles as a reasonably good rotational defensive lineman. And Morgan Fox, where he really has proven to help teams, is as a pass rusher, as a versatile pass rusher that can rush inside and outside. I'd assume that the Bills would want him to rush mostly interior gaps. And he's been pretty effective. Like most of his career, he's played 50% of the defensive snaps. And every season since 2020, except for one, he's logged at least 30 pressures. The only year he didn't was in 2021 with Carolina, where he had 25 pressures. So this is a decent rotational interior pass rusher. And look, that's something that the Bills can use in a big way. And so, no, they didn't make a trade deadline deal, and I'm not trying to deflect or detract from that. I have massive disappointment in Brandon Beane for not being able to get a trade deadline deal done, especially that Waddle situation. But pretty solid to get a couple of good practice squad additions, and I think it's only a matter of time before they get their chance to help this roster. So Morgan Fox, Mecole Hardman, welcome to the mix. Want to share a couple of last thoughts on this matchup with Tampa Bay. And I study these opponents every week, of course, and there are just some things that seem so obvious to me that the Bills need to do in this football game to get a win. When you talk about the Bills defense, I think this really needs to be a blitz aggressive game plan. The Bills are kind of middle of the pack in blitz rate. I think this is a week to really accelerate your utilization of blitzes. Obviously, the Bucs are without their 2 starting guards and Ben Bredesen and Cody Mauch, and they're starting 2 players in Dan Feeney and Mike Jordan that started this year on the practice squad. And so I think you have an opportunity to stress that, but Baker Mayfield this year has not performed well against the blitz. In fact, in terms of EPA per dropback when blitzed, he's 30th in the NFL. When he's not blitzed, he's 5th best in EPA per dropback. And so when you consider the depth that Tampa's using up front with their guard situation, when you consider the metrics for Baker Mayfield against the blitz, and of course the fact that he's playing through an oblique injury right now and he doesn't necessarily have the same movement skills that you typically see out of Baker Mayfield, you have got to relentlessly consider blitzing this player. And so I'm excited to see what type of pressure schemes that Bobby Babich and Sean McDermott and Ryan Nielsen can cook up, because this is that type of game where you want to be aggressive with how you choose to rush, in particular with blitzes, in particular interior gaps. When it comes to the Bills' offense against Tampa's defense, Tampa's one of the worst defenses in the NFL defending play action passes. They're one of the worst defenses in the NFL in defending running backs in the passing game. You got to cook up play action. You got to throw the ball to running backs, especially because I don't think the Bills have very good matchup opportunities when it comes to their receivers and tight ends against what Tampa has at safety and at corner. I think those are advantages, clear advantages for Tampa Bay, especially when you don't have Dalton Kincaid for this football game. Throw the ball to your running backs, cook up play action. The Bucs have this linebacker, Servassier Dennis. He's the running mate to Levante David. He is arguably the worst coverage linebacker in the NFL. He's given up the most receiving yards against his coverage of any linebacker so far this year, 484 yards. That's the most. No linebacker's given up more. Joe Brady, you talk about, who's the guy to go after? Where's Waldo on the defense? It's that guy, Servassier Dennis in particular, if he's in coverage. You have got to find ways to get him in situations that he's uncomfortable and throw to that guy, because that guy's given up a lot of yards. And then the other thing offensively for Buffalo, you have to work to create explosive runs. Tampa is a very good overall snap-to-snap run defense, exceptional. I think they're something like 24% of runs against Tampa Bay go for less than a yard. It's like the third best mark in the league. But they've been very susceptible to giving up some explosive runs. James Cook, very good at getting explosive runs. So what schemes can you come up with to give yourself an opportunity to get some of those explosive runs? So that's what I'm looking for. Play action, throwing the ball to your running backs, and figuring out how you can get some explosive runs against a defense that's been susceptible to giving up explosive runs. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk to Dr. Kyle Trimble about the injuries. Excited to get his thoughts on Dalton Kincaid. Also want to get kind of caught up on the Gabe Davis situation and what happened with that injury, what the rehabs looked like, and, kind of the path forward for Gabe Davis. So we'll do all that here next. So folks, be sure to stick with me. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement this sports season. Whether you're following the NFL, NBA, or both, there's no better time to jump in on the action. If you haven't tried it yet, Prize Picks is the simplest way to play. You just pick more or less on at least two player stats, and if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play anywhere that Prize Picks operates, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I've been using Prize Picks during both football Sundays and NBA tip-offs. It keeps every game exciting, and the injury reboot feature is awesome. If one of your players leaves early with an injury, the injury reboot feature will save your lineup from a loss. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. I'm joined now by Kyle Trimble. He's a doctor of physical therapy. He runs bangedupbills.com. You can follow him on social media at bangedupbills. He joins us each week to get ready for the upcoming Bills game from an injury perspective. We got a few things to dive into. I want to start with the slot corner situation where the Bills starting slot corner, Taron Johnson, listed as questionable for this game, and Cam Lewis is also listed as questionable for this game. Sean McDermott on Friday said that it felt like things were trending well for Cam Lewis, but he did say there was a yellow flag with Taron Johnson. So I'll get out of the way and let you explain what the heck's going on with these guys.
Yeah, so we know that Taron Johnson was dealing with a groin injury. He suffered in practice 2 weeks ago, right before the game, and then missed the Kansas City game and the Miami game. And then he was looking to be trending in the right direction this week before having this little setback whenever that happened. It sounds like Thursday, because he was limited on Friday. And they mentioned this before practice on Friday, so keep that in mind. This would be huge if he were to miss again, because it just seems like these practice injuries never stop. They're definitely more than they have had in previous years. Considering it's a yellow flag, it's like, do you sit him out as a precaution, or do you think it's okay and he can play through it since he's missed the last two games there? As for Lewis, he came up with a calf injury. I don't know when it happened in the game. Like, there was one play late in the game where he was slow to get up, but it looked like he got hit more upper body than lower body. And this is a calf, which is notable because he dealt with a right calf injury through, I believe, OTAs and definitely through training camp. So I don't know if this is an aggravation of that or whatever's going on with that, or even it's the same side. So common sense would say Johnson's going to play based off of the fact that he's had more time to rest, but he also had the setback. And you got Lewis, who they're saying is trending in the right direction. My initial gut says Johnson plays, Lewis sits. However, knowing everything else that goes on with that, I almost want to flip it and say Lewis is going to go and Johnson sits, which I'm probably going to go with my gut on that and say Lewis goes because, Johnson's getting older. He's dealt with a whole bunch of different injuries. Save him for the playoffs there. So it's unfortunate, but they got to figure this thing out, what's going on in practice. I mean, this is getting ridiculous, and it's just, there's always those surprises, and I'm sure it's frustrating to them as well.
No doubt about it. How about Shaq Thompson? This one's very interesting to me. He's missed a couple of games recently with a hamstring, and then he didn't practice at all he was limited on Wednesday, full participant Thursday and Friday, listed as questionable for the game. And obviously I'm interested in your thoughts here, but one thing you're not going to be able to answer for me is, if he is able to go on Sunday, what role does he fill? And, does he eat into Terrell Bernard's playing time? And it's pretty clear that Terrell's playing with something, right? He's not moving like he typically does. The performance is nothing like it traditionally is. And so if Shaq Thompson's available, does he take some playing time away from Terrell Bernard? But step one is Shaq Thompson being able to go. What are your thoughts here?
I mean, he's been out long enough for a hamstring. We see guys miss 1-2 weeks with a hamstring designation. So this fits the bill. Practice a full Thursday and Friday. I can't imagine why they're going to sit him out unless I don't know why they would sit him out at this point. And especially with Terrell Bernard, like you mentioned, Eric Turner of Cover One highlighted that he's been not right all season. I've spoken with Eric directly about this stuff, and it's been like this since the beginning of the season. Bernard did have the hamstring injuries himself during preseason, and he's just still not running right there. So do you platoon these guys? Do you take some snaps off of Bernard's plate? I don't think that you have him be an emergency, availability like he did previously, but I'd hope that Thompson can go, even though he's older with his own hamstring and the Achilles last year. So I'll be surprised if he doesn't play this weekend just because of the other issues we're seeing at linebacker with the injuries.
Two players ruled out for the Bills in this game. Tight end Dalton Kincaid, defensive tackle Fedarian Mathis. Mathis has a shoulder. Kincaid has a hamstring. We all saw that happen during the game. I hope these guys, or especially Kincaid, Mathis can take it or leave it, but obviously Kincaid, a huge part of this offense. What's your outlook on these two players?
Mathis, I'm not really sure what's going on with him. I looked at the film. There wasn't anything glaring that said, hey, this is what happened with a shoulder injury. The only notable thing I could see is that he did run into Landon Jackson unintentionally, of course, and that's when Jackson hurt his knee and is now on injured reserve. But there wasn't anything crazy about that. So there wasn't any tape on it in the second half or anything. So, him being out isn't a huge loss, especially with the other defensive tackles available. And then as for Kincaid, I mean, he came up lame at about 10 minutes left in the third quarter, grabbing that right hamstring. It wasn't surprising that he was week to week, because sometimes we'll see guys go out with a hamstring that's just subtle and they only miss a week. But when they're visibly in pain and hopping off, it's going to be a more significant injury. So we know he's going to miss this week. I'm expecting him to miss next week as well. And then actually, no, excuse me. So
the Thursday game is next.
The Thursday game. Yeah. So he's going to miss this game. Yeah, he's going to miss definitely the next game. And then we'll see what it looks like coming off the mini bye. A lot of times if guys are unsure on that Sunday game, that they'll play on the Thursday game, but this doesn't apply in that case. So he's definitely going to miss this upcoming game. And then we'll see what it looks like if he has the mini bye, gives him enough time to be fully recovered. But I also know they're not going to want to push him, given that the tight end depth is actually rather good with having Knox and Haas available to them. So we'll just wait and see what happens with him. I hope that he does come back sooner, because he's been a great addition to the offense. But with him dealing with the different soft tissue injuries he's had, that's not something you want him rushing back out there and then him having a repeat of the second half of 2024 where he just wasn't the same guy.
Didn't warn you that we needed to talk about Landon Jackson, but we need to talk about Landon Jackson here. Got injured against Miami, looked pretty ugly, but it sounds like the outlook here is actually pretty good. According to Jordan Schultz, it's a torn MCL and PCL. And so tell us why that's better than an ACL. But also, Jackson's had a pretty lengthy history of knee injuries. And so I'm kind of curious in your overall thoughts on the status of his knees.
He's had, two ACL tears, both on the left side before. And this was injury to his right knee. And this would happen, like I said before, with Mathis inadvertently running into his leg. He kind of got hit and knocked over. And Jackson was also kind of pinned up against his blocker, so he didn't really have anywhere to go to even avoid the hit to begin with there. So the fact that this is a torn MCL and PCL, and I don't like to use the phrase torn, because I think when they say sprained, it means it's minor, but then a torn means it's significant. And we haven't seen them doing it, or we did see that they put him on injury reserve, which isn't a surprise given the timeline. I'm assuming it's going to be about 6 to 8 weeks, which would take him to about the end of the regular season, maybe playoffs if they need to bring him back there. But Torn says surgery. And the nice thing about the MCL and PCL is they usually don't require surgery. Now, there are cases where guys do need surgery to repair those, but more often than not, they can rehab them and they do pretty well without it. So I don't like the phrasing Schultz used, but he was just repeating what he was told there. And it just, he was a guy coming in with a lot of injuries to begin with. And that sweet spot is in the third round where they take guys who are definitely talented, but have injury concerns. It's kind of like the injury discount, if they will. And the Bills have done this historically. Spencer Brown, Terrell Bernard, Zach Moss, Landon Jackson, Dawson Knox, you name it. That's what that's where they do. That's their sweet spot. So this isn't a surprise, though. This wasn't Jackson's fault. It's one of those things that it's unfortunate. And I'm sure he probably thought he tore his ACL at the time because it looked like it, given how he went down. But he got PCL and MCL, and he can come back later. But then that also prevents him from having to focus on rehab all season if he had torn the ACL versus just having to get healthy and then you can train and prepare for year 2.
Yeah, 9 to 12 months on an ACL, and this other thing's 6 to 8 weeks, you say. So that's a lot better of a situation. TJ Sanders has been on injured reserve, the defensive tackle, second round pick, been on injured reserve with a knee injury. He's fulfilled the 4 weeks that he has to miss. He's listed as questionable for this game with a knee injury. The Bills, of course, would have to activate him and do all those types of things. But based on the timeline and what you've been able to gather about this situation, what do you know?
I know that Nick Sabato of Niagara Gazette had interviewed him earlier this week. He states that he had a procedure done on his right knee, and he said it was the same thing that Alec Anderson had in the preseason. So this sounded like it was a knee scope. And Anderson returned a lot quicker than Sanders did, but they were probably banking on Sanders, just giving more time to let this thing heal back up because he had never had surgery before. And not that shouldn't be a qualifier to put somebody on injury reserve versus not if they've had surgery before, but they might have said, hey, let's slow play this being a rookie, where they knew Anderson, let's give him a few weeks off during training camp and then they can ramp him back up there. And that's what they did. So similar timelines, but they just used the roster spot. Of course, then you see the injuries to Michael Hoyt at Oliver, and they could have used him and maybe avoid the surgery altogether. So I'd be really shocked if he hasn't played this weekend, given the injury to Mathis and just the need to get him back out there for those snaps.
Gabe Davis. It's possible that he goes this week. I think it's only a matter of time. If it's not this week, it's going to be soon. And I think Gabe Davis will be part of this offensive equation. But what I wanted to ask you about is, what's the story here? He got hurt last year. It's been a long recovery for Gabe to get back on the practice field, which he's now been on for a couple weeks. What was his injury, and what's been up with this rehab? It's really taken a long time.
So he had, if you recall, he had injured his left knee in week 18 of the 2023 season. He had partially torn his PCL when he was in the end zone and had to leave that game. And that was the game where we stormed back and beat Miami in the final regular season game to take the AFC East there. So he didn't play through at the playoffs that year because of the PCL. And then he was playing for Jacksonville when he signed in the offseason. And I guess, to our benefit or the detriment of the Jaguars there, they signed him knowing how that knee was looking with the partially torn PCL, and it never got fully right there. And then in week 10 last year, he had tried pivoting and tore his medial meniscus, and that was back in week 11. So he had surgery to repair both. The issue was, though, he also developed a blood clot during this time. And he said that I know would slow anybody up. I mean, you have to get on blood thinners and kind of slow things down for a little bit because you don't want to have any more bleeding anywhere or rile things up there. So that definitely slowed up his rehab. And then the PCL sometimes can take a little bit longer because that is a stabilizer of the knee. So the tibia doesn't slide backwards in relation to the femur, whereas the ACL prevents the tibia from going the other way, going forward there. So that does slow it up, but then we also know the meniscus can take some time, especially with more complex tears. And we know that he had some knee irritation, I believe it was last week, where he was doing great, and then they had to kind of settle him back down, which they usually don't talk about practice squad players in that way. So the rehab can just be slow, and I just want to make sure that the PCL is stable, that there's not going to be shifting in there. And then they're also going to make sure the meniscus is still acting as a shock absorber and he's not having any further, not necessarily grinding down, but they want to make sure that the meniscus is going to help protect the joint and that he can do all the things he needs to without getting too irritated. Because if you rush through it too quickly, you can either tear out the repair or just make things irritated, and then you're just kind of working through discomfort the entire time.
Last thing, there's some new information on Damar Hamlin. Kind of out of sight, out of mind, but you have some new information to share on that.
So Damar Hamlin had posted, I believe, on Wednesday or Thursday night on YouTube. He has a YouTube channel you should go check out, that he detailed about how his left pectoral injury, he had to get it repaired. So he had injured the pectoral injury ahead of either week 5 or week 6. I can't remember which, but he got put on the injury reserve at the same time TJ Sanders did. So what happened was Hamlin had collided with somebody in practice, and that was enough to where he tore the sternal head of the pectoral muscle off, and he had to go out to Vail, Colorado to get it repaired. And so he is a 15-minute video on YouTube detailing how everything is there, but we knew he was on injury reserve for the pectoral. We knew that there's a chance he could come back. And then looking at the timeline, when we get this repaired in mid-October, there's a good chance he can return for the playoffs if he's needed. So that's great that he's going to be ready to go. But we didn't know anything else other than pectoral and that he was on injury reserve. So now we have some additional information.
All right. Tons of good information from Dr. Kyle today. Not that big of an injury report, but a lot of things to discuss. And we appreciate you for hopping on and, of course, sharing your expertise with us.
Absolutely, Joe. Thank you, and go Bills.
The NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium, surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout, it's frustrating. But that's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. Game Time is fast, it's easy, and it's backed by the Game Time guarantee. You're always going to get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. The app makes everything simple. You can even see the exact view from your seat before purchasing. It's faster, it's cheaper, and it's less stressful than any other way that you can purchase tickets. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. All right, welcome back, folks. We're going to get to the predictions here in this segment, but I would like to remind you about thejoemarino.com. I've got a lot going on. We've got other podcasts that I do. I've got a Substack where I provide additional written and film content. We have a text club, the Locked On Bills subtext community. We have a Discord channel, over 2,000 Bills fans in there. We go live every Wednesday night doing a hangout. Be part of it. See what's going on. We got a lot of community and extra content going on here. Go to thejoemarino.com. See what we have. You can type that right into your browser or go to today's show notes and click on the link to go to thejoemarino.com. Definitely check out the Substack. I've got a ton of content this week, including my second quarter report card for the Bills and my player grade adjustments for every player on the team. I have 6 players that I changed their grade based on this season. So check it out over at thejoemarino.com. All right, prediction time. Got 5 of those for you this week, as I usually do. So let's do it. The first one, I have this. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so far this year, they allow an average of 101 rushing yards per game. I think the Bills get at least 25 more yards than what the Bucs average giving up. So put me down for 126 or more rushing yards for the Bills. I respect Tampa's run defense. Todd Bowles, Vita Vea, they got some, heavy-handed, long-arm edge players. But I think the Bills will be able to find some opportunities here with maybe some explosive runs. And then I just feel like there's a unique element to the way that the Bills run the football that, regardless of what type of run defense you typically have, I think it's stressed in new ways against Buffalo. I think they'll find some success pounding the rock against Tampa in ways that a lot of teams haven't been able to find. A few have, but not many. Put me down for at least 126 rushing yards for the Bills on Sunday. Number 2, the Buffalo Bills have been not very effective at getting their running backs involved in the passing game. We've talked about this as a clear thing that the Bills must do against Tampa. So here's where I'm going to go with this. The Bills average 22 receiving yards per game this year to running backs. In fact, that's 29th in the NFL. Not so good. I think they top that by at least 10 yards. So put me down for 32 or more receiving yards for the Bills running backs in this game. So 10 more than their season average. Number 3, put me down for a Dawson Knox touchdown. Obviously, no Dalton Kincaid in this game. I think that will, of course, obviously lead to some more opportunities for Dawson Knox. But Dawson Knox is one of the most prolific touchdown scorers in the history of the Buffalo Bills. If he has one more touchdown, which I predict he's going to get on Sunday, he'll be top 10 all time. That's crazy, right? Top 10 all time for receiving touchdowns in the history of the Bills, Dawson Knox. Also, if he gets one more, he will tie Pete Metzelar's for the most receiving touchdowns by a tight end in franchise history. I think we see this happen on Sunday. So put me down for a Dawson Knox touchdown. Number 4, I predict that the Bills intercept Baker Mayfield. And you might be thinking, Joe, that's not very bold or aggressive. Well, Baker Mayfield's thrown 2 interceptions so far this year. And the Bills have not been getting a ton of interceptions with their defense. They have 6 so far this year. That's 17th in the NFL. And they were like towards the bottom of the league until they picked off Tua twice last week. So I think the Bills will get an interception against Baker Mayfield, a guy that hasn't thrown many this year. And the Bills have not necessarily been ball hawking the ball away on the back end. So I have the Bills for at least 126 rushing yards, which is 25 more on average than the Bucs allow. I have at least 32 receiving yards for the Bills running backs, which is 10 more than the Bills season average. I have a Dawson Knox touchdown. I have an interception for the defense against Baker Mayfield. And then the last one is if I think the Bills win the game or not. I really do think the Bills win this game. And I think this is a tough matchup for sure. But ultimately, I just feel like the Bills are going to get up for this. They're at home. It's a marquee quarterback matchup. I think Baker Mayfield's one of the best in the league. Josh Allen's obviously one of the best in the league. And I just feel like Josh is probably feeling some doubt creeping in, right? You can feel it. You can sense it. I just think he wills this one. I think they'll run the ball decently well. I think this is one of those Josh Allen games where he just figures it out. And with Tampa's injuries offensively, they're not going to have either of their starting guards. No Mike Evans, no Chris Godwin, no Bucky Irving. You know, that really limits their offense. And they've had some challenges kind of working through that. It's supposed to be cold, maybe a little bit of precipitation, a little bit of rain on Sunday afternoon. Those boys from Florida coming up north. I just kind of like the recipe here for the Bills in what feels like a really important moment in the season. And obviously this game is this game, but you know, you look, just zoom out a little bit. The Bills play Thursday night in Houston. By the end of the week, by the end of next week, or really, you know, by Thursday night. So like in a 5-day stretch, the Bills are either going to be 8-3, 7-4, or 6-5. And it feels like any one of those marks just feel completely different than the other. Of course, you want to be 8-3. 7-4 feels really likely. You could convince me that they'll lose them both. It'd be 6-5. But this feels like a really critical stretch. And, you know, the stretch that really dates back to the Kansas City game. You had Kansas City, these two, Pittsburgh coming up. You know, it's like kind of the meat of the schedule where felt like it was the most challenging stretch, and you lost to the freaking Dolphins in there. So it's time to rally. It's time to play your best football. It's time to put it together. And I don't know what the rest of the season looks like, but I like the Bills on Sunday. I really do. All right, folks, there you have it. The hay is in the barn. We've done all we can to get ready for this game. The only thing that's left to do is for the Bills to go out there and win this thing. So I look forward to watching that. I look forward to covering it all next week. Of course, Bill Squad live right after the game concludes. Myself, Jeremy White, Jerry Ostrowski will be live right after the game on the YouTube channel. And then, of course, we'll do all the regular post-game stuff that we do for Locked On Bills. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.